From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. Is Andre Johnson.
Junior.
Do not forget the Junior. It's very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And boy, do we have another day of fire content here today on this Wednesday morning. Also, hello, good morning to the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network. Good morning to all of you on YouTube. It is Wednesday morning, but our Tuesday was quite a day. How you feeling today?
I'm tired, Sean. You know I'm not a morning person.
You're not.
I'm the kind of guy that likes to sleep till 11 a.m., but when duty calls, and we have something very important to talk about when it comes to your New Orleans Saints.
Yes. And by the way, you and your wife don't have kids yet.
Yeah.
Trust me, you'll be getting up early and early once those kids
That's
come
why
around.
I'm sleeping until 11 and 12 while I can, because when that day comes,
yeah, right.
6 a.m., woo.
It's early. It comes early. Okay. Look, Tuesday was a hectic day because what had been talked about finally became official, because now the Saints have a new head coach, and shocker, it's Kellen Moore, the guy we've been talking about for quite some time. We had really honed in on him all last week for Super Bowl week, and that, of course, is where we have to go with the big picture today.
Right. It came out early Tuesday that the Saints got their guy, Kellen Moore, the Eagles' offensive coordinator, fresh off a Super Bowl that just so happened to occur right here in the city of New Orleans. Kellen Moore will be staying in the Big Easy, coaching the Saints. So, Sean, we've been talking about this possibility for a while, and it really seemed like it was going to be a potential issue if you didn't land Moore, because the other options weren't nearly as qualified. So the Saints closed the deal. What were your initial impressions?
Well, my initial impression was finally.
Ooh.
Finally. Even Tuesday, the day started with, there could be a deal coming later today. Then it was, a deal is expected to be finalized soon. There were like these little drips and slow drips and drabs, and it's like, okay, did they do something? Finally, I got the text message, agreement in place. Okay, we're going with that.
Yeah.
The agreement is in place. The deal is finally done. The Saints have Kellen Moore. He becomes the 19th head coach in franchise history, youngest head coach in franchise history, youngest head coach in the NFL next season. And I have to say, as we sit here and really process it after the day of coverage, it can get really hectic, and then you try to process it as much as you can. Doesn't it feel like this is the first small glimmer of hope that this organization has seen in quite some time? It feels like a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. Finally, a win. A positive win. Doesn't it feel that way? It feels like a little bit of a glimmer of hope.
It definitely does. This might be the best Saints fans felt since week 2.
That's it. Season. That might have been the last time this organization has really felt like they had a win and felt like they were really on a good path. Look, I'm not going to call this a home run hire with Kellen Moore. We don't know what he's going to do. But after the winding, and I mean winding road that was the Saints 2025 head coaching search that included 7, 8 candidates, some virtual, some in person, some got the second interview, some turned down the second interview, some didn't get to the first interview, some said thanks but no thanks. We're finally here. And the Saints are finally here, despite that long, winding road, and they land Kellen Moore. I have used the phrase many times. I will use it once more. The Saints landed Kellen Moore, a young, bright, offensive mind. And as a bonus, they got a young, bright offensive mind with no ties to the organization, which forces complete and utter change and utter flip on perspective and fresh ideas and a new way of doing things, because with how stale this organization had gotten, it needed it. It needed it so badly. And they got it. So that's great. He comes to the organization with a really, just think about it. I was just kind of going through it. This guy's got a unique resume. For a guy that's only 36 years of age. He's one of those, a 36-year-old that gets into coaching and gets that fast rise. Usually they start really young. Well, he didn't do that. He didn't start at 22 years old. He was one of the faces of college football.
He was.
I mean,
putting up crazy numbers.
I mean, that was a really fun program, and they're kind of getting it back, that Boise State program where, I mean, he was one of the faces of one of those programs everybody rooted for because they were a small school. They had the blue grass. They were slaying the Giants. They were doing, not the Giants football team, but the big Giants of college football. And, he was the guy that was leading the charge. Everybody remembers that kind of shorter southpaw Kellen Moore leading the charge for 4 years. He was there for 5, but he played for 4 years. He had 50 wins. This guy won more games than any other in college football as a quarterback. I mean, that's saying something. So he was the face of a program that a lot of people had attention on for a very, very long time. Didn't get drafted, was an undrafted free agent, then went to Detroit, then went to Dallas. Went from his last year in Dallas, Dak's backup, to Dak's quarterbacks coach, to Dak's offensive coordinator in a 3-year span. That is a crazy flip on how it happened. He walked from the quarterback room to the quarterback coach's room to the coaching staff, and then just really had a pretty meteoric rise when you go from quarterback coach to offensive coordinator for the Cowboys.
Yeah.
For the Cowboys, which really goes to show you where he was from a football IQ standpoint and just where he was from a creativity standpoint when it came to offensive football, because Mike McCarthy was a guy calling his own plays. Now, I know in that little realm, they were back and forth with who was actually calling plays. It went back and it went forth. But nonetheless, Kellen Moore really made a name for himself pretty quickly. And he's gotten plenty of real-world experience in a very short period of time. As we just mentioned, you go from backup quarterback, 1-year quarterback coach, then boom, 6 years of offensive coordinator calling plays. I mean, you had to do something right to earn that kind of trust from these organizations that you had worked for. So I love the fact that he has earned that trust. I love the fact that wherever he's gone, from Dallas to the Chargers to the Philadelphia Eagles, Kellen Moore, no matter how it looks, doesn't care. He knows how to score points. That is your job. That's as an offensive coordinator. And it's really your job in football. And its most purest form. How do you score points? I know you're scoring a lot of them. Well, this guy had 4 of those 6 seasons as offensive coordinator, top 7 scoring offenses in a day and age where scoring points, a lot of teams score a lot of points. So I think Kellen Moore has certainly earned my respect in that regard. When you really look at the resume and then dig a little deeper and look at his playing career, it's like, man, this is a really unique sort of just culmination of a guy that really has done a lot of unique things and the rise just isn't exactly the way you would do it. Normally a guy that finishes his career the next year, he's not a quarterback's coach, and then 2 years after that, he's not an offensive coordinator, or the following year, 2 years after he retires, to where now you are making this meteoric rise. You see it sometimes in the NBA. You just don't see it really in the NFL. So for all those reasons, I have intrigue. I have a little bit of excitement. I have a little bit of hope. I have a little bit of just momentum here. I feel like this could be hopefully the start of something. But Saints fans, you know it and I know it. You got to be patient. You're going to have to be patient. Yeah. I just don't see a 2006 season coming next year. I know that's what y'all are banking on, and I know that would be great for everyone involved to get it, and I am pulling for it. But we have to be realistic here. I don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to happen overnight. It's probably going to take 2 or 3 seasons. The Saints were very ahead of schedule in 2006. 2007 and 2008 were more like the parts of the plan when you hire a new coach, especially where the franchise was at that point. So that's generally how they go. I think they'll have their moments next year. I think they'll have their struggles next year, but hopefully you will see the growth. But let's be real here. The personnel is not where it needs to be. The personnel is nowhere near where it needs to be, and it's not going to get there for a couple of off seasons. But my message is simple. Enjoy the wins. Yep. Enjoy the wins. And for the Saints organization, enjoy every bit of positive press. Enjoy every bit of positive momentum, no matter how big, no matter how small that you get, because you ain't had a lot of them in a really long time. And at least now, it's new. It's not the same. It's not losing the same old way. It's not being boring the same old way. No, you got a young, creative, offensive mind that knows how to score points coming in for his first opportunity, and it's going to be just a whole lot of newness and just excitement surrounding Kellen Moore. I don't know what that's going to lead to wins, how much it's going to factor into wins and losses, but I think overall it's going to be a good start, or at least a let me rephrase that. It's going to be, hopefully, this hire is going to be the turning point this organization needs to eventually get to where they want to go, which is back to that consistent level of success that they've enjoyed. And who knows, maybe Kellen Moore will get his second ring one day, but this time as a head coach of the New Orleans Saints. What say you?
You mentioned that ring. On Sunday night in the Superdome, Eagles head coach Nick Sirianni stood on the stage, and he said, and I quote, "Kellen, let's run this bleep back." And, as the days after the Super Bowl started to pass, I started to get a little nervous because now I'm looking and I'm like, this Saints job was said to be the worst job in football. It was the last opening available, and it wasn't very close. Kellen Moore is now the hottest offensive coordinator in the world. He's probably the hottest young coach in the world. Is Kellen Moore maybe going to run this bleep back like Nick Sirianni wanted him to and, maybe look into the 2026 cycle for a bigger job? Or, is the pursuit of this Saints job maybe going to cool off now that he's won the Super Bowl? So I got to give the Saints some credit for still closing that deal. And I know we talked when we were on Super Bowl Media Row. Is this a win for Mickey? Is it not? At the end of the day, you got the guy that you wanted. If you look at a checklist at the beginning of the offseason, we would have said, what do you want? Number one, and we have said it. What do you want? We both said we want a guy that really isn't connected to the organization. Someone who has nothing to do with Sean Payton, Pete Carmichael, Dennis Allen, Mickey Loomis, Gail Benson, none of it. Something completely new, something completely fresh. Check. We got that. I said it a lot. You said it as well. A young offensive mind that'll bring some creativity and some things that maybe we haven't seen before. We got that. Check. And we also got a winner. I mean, he's literally coming off a Super Bowl. And, some of the other candidates, Joe Brady. You can look at Joe Brady. We were both high on Joe Brady. But Joe Brady has failed in the NFL to a certain degree. He failed in Carolina. You look at Cliff Kingsbury. Another hot name, someone who he was at the top of my list. You could argue he failed in Arizona. Kellen Moore, like you said, it's a short resume. He really hasn't failed yet. I mean, what's the worst blemish on his resume is maybe the 1 year in L.A. where the offense was average, but he was dealing with injuries. I mean, in Dallas, he was putting up top, and that was with Mike McCarthy as well, so you got to factor that in. But they were putting out top-tier offenses. He goes to Philadelphia, top 10 offense, a Super Bowl, led by Saquon Barkley, and, just the versatility that he showed throughout last season. You've got to give him credit for that. So in giving him credit, you've got to give the Saints credit for getting their guy, because when you started seeing, the Bears hired a coach, the Jets hired a coach, Aaron Glenn's not coming here. Oh, there goes the Vegas job. There goes the Jacksonville job. And you're looking around and you're like, well, these jobs and these coaches, they're starting to run out. And you look at the names that the Saints were interviewing, from, Mike Kafka to Anthony Weaver, and those guys really didn't excite this fan base often. So coming out of all of that with Kellen Moore, that is a good thing. Second thing I wanted to say is kind of the second thing you said. Now, I know we're excited. It's time to temper your expectations, because this, last time the Saints hired Sean Payton, 4 years in the championship, I think it's going to take much longer this time, because when you look at it, this is a team without a franchise quarterback. Their best offensive weapon is going to turn, 31 next season in Alvin Kamara. You've got Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, two young receivers, but they still have a lot to prove. Taysom Hill, there's a big question mark on Taysom Hill, who's going to be, 34, 35 next season. You've got an offensive line that was probably the most injured unit last season. You got a defense where your best linebacker is Demario Davis.
Same age as Kellen Moore.
Right. Same age as Kellen Moore. 36-year-old is not only your best linebacker, but let's just say Demario Davis is your best defensive player.
Maybe best overall player.
Exactly. Like your best defensive back, despite having Paulson Adebo for a stretch, Alante Taylor for the season, and drafting Kool-Aid McKinstry, even having Jordan Howden as a young guy, your best DB was probably Tyrann Mathieu. And on the defensive line, the only person to really set themselves apart was Brian Brzee. So you've got a lot of parts of this team, if you're Kellen Moore, that you got to look around and say, okay, this is not a quick, I'm going to walk through the door, I'm going to win 10 games, we're going to get in the playoffs and go on a magical run.
No.
He's got to get to work on starting to fill some of those gaps, and that starts with filling out a staff, and you're already starting to hear, some of the rumored names of the guys that he could bring in. It's going to start with the NFL draft, which we talked about, 2-3 weeks ago. And Saints have that number 9 pick. Where do they go with that? Do they reach for a quarterback? It says in a team that likes to trade back very often. Do you address the O-line? Do you look for Ashton Genty, a running back? Maybe Tedero McMillan if he's there, a wide receiver, just a playmaker that can make defenses fear them on a game in, game out basis. And then after you clear the 60, 70 million that you're going to have to clear in cap space over the next month, you got to look in free agency and try to find some cheaper options who can come in and make an impact. Because when you look at last year's free agency class that they brought in, Chase Young probably underwhelmed a little bit compared to what people hoped that he would be. Will Harris, he was pretty good at times, but like Willie Gay Jr. probably didn't play as consistently and have as consistent of an impact as you would have liked. Their most impactful free agent, unless I'm forgetting somebody, was Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and he was signed in the middle of the season. So, the Saints really have a lot of things that you checked head coach off the checklist. You still got about 7 more things before, you can really start talking about, okay, the Saints are coming back.
Right. So enjoy the small win of landing your guy, but the real work begins now. And look, they're a little behind the 8 ball. I'm quite sure he's been working some back channels. I don't think this was something he just decided on Tuesday and not put any thought or even had any kind of inkling as to who he might search out to be a part of his coaching staff. That's option 1, or that's priority number 1. Then you get to the combine, look at the draft, and you got to make a major decision on a quarterback, which we will have a separate pod on. I promise you that, because there's no easy answer in that regard. Do you look in-house? Do you stay with the veteran because you're a first-year coach? Do you turn to a Spencer Rattler or a Jake Haener, who are obviously inexperienced and haven't won a game? Do you turn to a veteran free agent somewhere else? Do you look in the draft? I mean, you can legitimately make a case for every single one of those options right there. So he's going to have to make a case or make a decision on that, and I am quite sure a guy that detailed, that creative, that organized, that versatile, and the way he is able to operate an offense to get the most out of them, has a preference on the way he wants to go at that position, because he knows how important that position certainly is. Again, there's going to be a lot of talk about an enforcer on the staff, a guy that can come in and be the guy that can be the jerk, that can come in and tear into people if need be. I think that's certainly something that's going to be warranted. I think that's something he's going to need. But this is not a person with, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but, I was around Pete Carmichael for a long time. I was around Clint Kubiak for a long time last year. They are really soft-spoken guys. And Kellen Moore is not a big rah-rah guy, but this is a guy that has been in the limelight. This is a guy that has been the face of, like I said, everybody liked that Boise State team back then. Everybody liked it, like them. And he was one of the faces of that. And he's been a quarterback. He's a coach's kid. I mean, I am still processing that. Has that ever happened before, where you go from backup quarterback to quarterback coach to offensive coordinator in 3 seasons with the same organization? So there's something special about him if he's been trusted with that. And like you said, he didn't fail. It's not like, oh no, they got to they went in those stops, they went in that way, back up to quarterback coach to OC, and then the bottom fell out. No, I mean, they had top 10 scoring offenses at one point, and they had number 1 scoring offense.
Oh, yeah.
One of the years in Dallas, maybe 19 or 21, one of the two. I don't know. But anyway, this was a guy that has not just had a unique journey, but he's kind of stepped up in each spot. I mean, it's not easy starting 4 years in college football. It's not easy to take that path that I took. And then also, it's not easy to so if he's 36 now and it's 2025, 2018 was his first year coaching. So he was 29 years old at that time. To give up your lifelong dream of playing quarterback in the NFL. Oh, by the way, he's won everywhere. And and the former Saints head coach, Sean Payton, used to always say with guys that have a lot of wins on their resume, that's not by accident. There's something about them. And I even checked. He started 5 games as a quarterback, as a backup, and he got 5 starts. You know what his record was?
Was it, 3-2?
3-2. Yeah. So he's got a winning record there as well.
True, hey.
So it's always when he's involved in significant roles, usually the team's scoring points and that team's winning games. Now, in saying that, there's a whole different challenge he's got waiting for him right here because there's a lot of things that have to go right just to be successful in a couple seasons. An insane amount of things have to go right for them to be successful right away, and that is, I think the only path is you strike gold on the draft, and you somehow are able to, whoever you pick at quarterback just connects with Kellen Moore, and you're able to be somewhat healthy. That will be the only way I could see even a remote chance of having a playoff type season next year. So this is for the long haul. I was not able to figure out how long that contract was, but I'm quite sure Kellen Moore understands the situation that he's in. He had leverage here. What's the worst that could have happened? He went back to Super Bowl champs and called plays again and probably get his chances next year. I'm quite sure Mickey Loomis is going to, like he normally does, get out of the way, let him pick his staff, and then allow him the heavy hand when it comes to personnel. That's why you're bringing a guy like this in. And he's not agreeing to this situation unless he's getting those boxes checked on what he wants. So Kellen Moore has a big challenge ahead, but he also has, in my opinion, an incredible opportunity ahead. So, look, we cover this team. I wish him all the success because this town's a whole lot better when the Saints are winning.
Yeah, and I'm actually really excited to, I don't know it'll probably be a while, but when we actually get to talk to some Saints players, because I'm curious about him being 36 years old. At 36 years old, you're just as old or maybe a year or two older as some of your players. I mean, age-wise, he's right there with Cameron Jordan. He's right there with Demario Davis. He's so young that he played against Derek Carr in college. He's right there with Alvin Kamara. He's right there with Tyrann Mathieu. So I'm curious.
Taysom, all those guys.
Taysom Hill, like having a coach that's age-wise kind of like your peer, but this isn't like this is my quarterback's coach. This is your head coach, and he's the same age as them. So I'm curious how that dynamic is like in the NFL, because I know that just listening to different players talk, it's a different kind of respect that comes with being a former player that is now a coach. Someone who's been in the trenches and someone who's been in the locker rooms can vibe with players a little differently than somebody who has not necessarily been in those rooms. And that's probably part of the reason why Kellen Moore was able to go from backup quarterback in Dallas to quarterback coach in Dallas to offensive coordinator in Dallas, all in 3 seasons, and like you said, we will have a pod on this. Quarterback is going to be the biggest thing that he does, because I look at some of the young coach quarterback duos in the league and how they've taken off. I look at Dave Canales and Bryce Young in Carolina. Dave Canales, who, by the way, also had a role in turning around Geno Smith and Baker Mayfield, getting with Bryce Young and finally seeing Bryce Young play competent football. I look at Joe Burrow and Zach Taylor a few years ago, to where they hooked up, and immediately in year 2, Joe Burrow is at the top of the NFL. I look at Tua Tagovailoa and Mike McDaniels in Miami. Tua struggled with the previous coach, and it looked like he was going to be out of the league for a while. Then Mike McDaniel comes in, and it clicks. Next thing you know, Tua's leading the league in passing, and they said Tua couldn't throw deep. Next thing you know, he's now getting Tyreek Hill. Certainly helps with that, but he's leading all of the deep passing stats. So, don't underestimate how important it is to have that young offensive coach, young quarterback pairing. So that's kind of what I'm excited for looking into the future, whether they find that guy this year or next year.
No, I agree. And don't underestimate how aware Kellen Moore is of that fact.
If anybody knows,
he was that guy at Boise State. He was that guy as coordinator. Juan asked me this on the news earlier last night. He said, what do you think he's thinking at quarterback? I said, I don't know. He's one with Dak Prescott, who compares pretty comparably to Derek Carr. If we're being honest, I've always, maybe not recently, but in their primes, I think they were in that same category. Justin Herbert was the big arm guy. Jalen Hurts is the best runner, who has obviously become more efficient as a passer. I don't know which kind he prefers, but he's going to get an opportunity to pick which kind he prefers. And that's why I'm very curious is, does he find his guy he can hand the ball to for the next decade this year, or is it going to be next year? I think he knows the answer to that. We don't know it. Maybe we'll find out when he meets with the media on Thursday at 11:30. Be very curious to see what happens. Also this, we talk about his Dallas role from player to coach, was there for 4 years. So in 2022, Dallas. 2023, L.A. 2024, Philly. 2025, New Orleans. I bet that young family of his, he's got 3 kids, is probably looking to settle down somewhere. So hopefully he gets a couple years here to, more than a couple years, quite a few years here to put his kids in a school that they can stay at for a couple years or along and maybe finish school here, whatever the case may be, because I'm quite sure those families bouncing around like that, it's hard.
It's not fun.
So I hope they can anchor down here, and he does a good enough job to keep that anchor down here, and he has all the success in the world. But right now, a lot of work to do. But you can small pat on the back for the landing of Kellen Moore. But like I said last week on the pod, this isn't a victory lap win. This is a small win, but you got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, you mentioned him finding the guy to hand the ball off to over the next decade. I think he finds him this year at pick 9, and I mean turning around and handing the ball off to. I think it needs to be Ashton Jeanty.
I would have no problem.
Goes to Boise State, Kellen Moore's alma mater. Lock down that running back position with a guy who is coming off one of the most impressive seasons, irregardless of position, that we've ever seen in the NCAA. Just like you've drafted young running backs when you had veterans in the past, I think Alvin Kamara to Ashton Jeanty, he takes a load off of AK, which is what we were saying he needed all last season, and Jeanty can slowly be integrated into the offense. I think that would be a knockout blow of a pick at number 9.
Yeah. Give me a playmaker. I don't care if it's him. I don't care if it's Penn State tight end. I don't care if it's the Arizona wide receiver. Give me a playmaker.
Please.
At 9. We'll see how it goes. He's got some tough decisions coming too, because he's going to have to look in the face of a lot of veterans and say, your service is no longer wanted here. So anyway, we got to get out of here. For Andre Johnson Jr., I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.